For nearly half a century, the United States and Iran have been locked in a conflict that rarely looked like a war, but always behaved like one. Not with front lines, but with assassinations, sabotage, sanctions, proxy militias, cyber attacks. A shadow war where every side claimed restraint, until restraint finally collapsed. And now, in late February 2026, the conflict has escalated into open strikes, regional panic, and a global economic shock, especially around the Strait of Hormuz. This is not a story that began yesterday. This is a story that began in 1979. To understand why the current crisis feels inevitable, you have to go back to the moment Iran stopped being a US partner and became a US adversary. In 1979, Iran's revolution toppled the Shah, Washington's key ally in the Gulf, and replaced him with an Islamic republic built on anti-Western identity. Soon after came the US embassy hostage crisis in Tehran, a trauma that permanently rewired American political memory. From that point forward, the relationship wasn't competitive. It was existential on both sides. Iran saw the US as the power that would always try to control it. The US saw Iran as a revolutionary state that could destabilize the entire Middle East. That's the psychological foundation of everything that happens next. By the 1990s and 2000s, Iran adapted to a reality. It could not match American conventional power, so it built an alternative. A proxy network, a regional wall made of allied militias, political movements, and armed groups in Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Yemen. The logic is simple. If you can't defeat a superpower head-on, you build deterrence by making the region too expensive to control. This is why Iran became associated with Hezbollah and later with armed groups in Iraq and elsewhere, because the proxy architecture is Iran's strategic equalizer. But the true center of gravity, the issue that repeatedly drags the US and Iran back to the brink, is the nuclear program. The world isn't only afraid of Iran having missiles. The world is afraid of Iran having missiles, with a nuclear option behind them. In 2015, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the JCPOA, was signed to restrict Iran's nuclear activities in exchange for sanctions relief. Supporters saw it as a firewall against war. Critics saw it as a delay, not a solution. Then the deal fractured. The US withdrew in 2018 and reimposed maximum pressure sanctions. And that's when the modern escalatory loop really begins. In 2019, tensions spiked around the Strait of Hormuz, the choke point where a huge share of global energy flows. Oil tankers were attacked in the Gulf of Oman, and the US blamed Iran, a claim Iran denied. In strategic terms, tanker incidents have a purpose. They remind the world that if Iran is cornered, global commerce becomes vulnerable. That vulnerability is leverage. Then came January 2020. The United States killed Qasem Soleimani in Baghdad, the commander of Iran's Quds Force. This was not just a man. This was the architect of Iran's regional playbook. The US framed him as responsible for attacks on Americans. Iran framed the strike as an act of war. And Iran retaliated, launching missiles at bases hosting US forces. Even without a full-scale war, the message was clear. The ceiling of escalation had risen. After that, the pattern becomes familiar. Diplomacy, stalled negotiations, sanctions, shadow strikes, proxy pressure. Meanwhile, international attention on Iran's nuclear capabilities kept intensifying, especially around enrichment levels and verification. And verification matters, because in nuclear crises, Uncertainty is gasoline. Then the Middle East detonated again through the Gaza war and its spillovers. And the Israel-Iran confrontation moved from indirect to nearly direct. In April 2024, after an Israeli strike on Iran's consulate compound in Damascus, Iran launched a large missile and drone attack on Israel, its first direct strike of that scale. Israel and partners intercepted much of it, but strategically, a line had been crossed. Iran had shown it could fire directly. Israel had shown it could absorb and respond, and everyone watching understood something chilling. A direct Israel-Iran exchange was no longer hypothetical. By mid-2025, the shadow war escalated into open strikes. Brookings describes a 12-day exchange of Israeli, Iranian, and American strikes that widened regional conflict dramatically. This is the part many people misunderstand. Even if a war is short, it can permanently change behavior. Because it breaks the seal. Once you do it once, doing it again becomes easier. And around the nuclear program, the IAEA repeatedly emphasized the importance of monitoring and the sensitivity of enrichment facilities, including Fordo as a key enrichment location for 60% enriched uranium. After those 2025 strikes, the verification environment degraded, and the world's visibility into Iran's stockpiles and activities became less reliable. That's not just a technical problem. It's a strategic nightmare, because when you can't verify, every side assumes the worst. Now we reach the immediate runway to today. In late February 2026, reporting from the IAEA situation becomes urgent. The watchdog said it cannot verify whether Iran has stopped enriching uranium or where the stockpile is, and it raised concerns about restricted access, especially after the June 2025 war environment. A critical figure in those reports, around 440.9 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60%, which experts say could be enough for multiple nuclear weapons if further enriched. This is the nuclear crisis in one sentence. Not necessarily that a weapon exists, but that the breakout potential becomes believable. And in geopolitics, believable can be enough to start a war. On February 28, 2026, the conflict erupts into a major operation. Reuters reports the US military named the campaign Operation Epic Fury, and that Israel conducted what it described as its largest flying mission in history, hitting hundreds of targets across Iran. The strikes reportedly targeted air defenses, strategic systems, and leadership nodes, a pattern typical of an attempt to blind, paralyze, and decapitate command and control. Now listen carefully. Some claims are contested. The US and Israeli leadership suggested Iran's supreme leader may have been killed. But Iran disputed this, and information remained unclear in early reporting. That uncertainty matters because leadership survival is the difference between a regime fighting for control or a regime collapsing into chaos. And chaos is exactly what terrifies regional neighbors. After the strikes, Iran responded with missile and drone attacks toward Israel and other locations, according to reporting, while the Pentagon said there were no US casualties in the initial wave. Then comes the economic pressure point, Hormuz. Iran warned the Strait of Hormuz had been closed, and major shippers and energy players suspended or rerouted traffic amid security warnings. This is the strategic lever Iran always holds. If the regime feels cornered, it threatens the global economy, not as a side effect, as a tool. and the world reacts immediately. Ships hesitate, insurance prices spike, markets flinch. Now let's break it down like an intelligence brief. 1. This is not one event. It's escalation stacking. 1979 built the hostility. 2015 tried to freeze the nuclear file. 2018 broke the deal. 2019 tested shipping vulnerability. 2020 raised the ceiling with Soleimani. 2024 crossed the direct fire line. 2025 broke the seal with an open exchange. 2026 escalated into a named U.S. operation with regional economic shock. 2. The nuclear blind spot is the accelerant. When monitoring collapses, fear becomes policy. The IAEA's inability to verify enrichment status and stockpile location turns risk into assumption. 3. Hormuz is the world's pressure point. Iran doesn't need to win a conventional war. It needs to make the world panic, because panic forces negotiation or intervention, or both. 4. The regional proxy network is still active, even if headlines focus on jets and missiles. This is where conflicts widen. Attacks on bases, attacks on shipping, strikes through allied groups. And once that starts, escalation becomes harder to control. So what happens next? There are 3 pathways. Path A, rapid de-escalation through back-channel diplomacy. If leadership control remains intact and both sides want an off-ramp. Path B, controlled tit-for-tat. Limited strikes, limited retaliation, markets unstable, but no full invasion. Path C, uncontrolled escalation. A single mass casualty event, a misread signal, a major oil disruption. And the crisis becomes a regional war. And here's the final truth. This isn't just about Iran. It's about the architecture of power in the Middle East and the cost of keeping it stable. From 1979 to 2026, the US-Iran conflict evolved from ideology to sanctions, to sabotage, to direct strikes. And now the world is watching the same question return. Can this be contained? Or has the shadow war finally become the real one? Thanks for watching. Comment, and if you like this content, consider subscribing. Until the next one,